Hello, my name is Elaina, and I am part of ACERO and over professional development. And today's talk that we have is with this lovely lady you see in front of your screen, Nisha. And we will be posting this on YouTube. Just for everybody to know, we have started what's called our Workplace Chronicles edition. These are for all of the talks and more intimate talks that we're going to be having with people that don't really fit on the standard webinar platform, that we're going to be providing a little bit more depth in this YouTube channel. So if you are interested in imposter syndrome, toxic talk, how to develop more humanity in our organizations. Upcoming things are about literally how to decide whether you want to stay or go in your organization, things like that. You want to subscribe to the channel because we will have a lot of things coming up at the end of the year and next year. Also, if you are enjoying the contact with Nisha, I want you to hit a like button so it will spread it out and everybody can get this information across the YouTube universe. And finally, if you have any comments or you would like for Nisha to come back and talk about, has a wide variety of expertise. If you want any of that coming back and for me to invite her back for other topics, I want you to put it down into the comments section and I answer everything and I would be happy to invite her back. So without further ado, just to get started, we're going to talk a little bit more about Nisha right here. And then afterwards, Nisha is going to give us an intro and tell us a little bit more about herself.
So the question I have today is, how are you showing up? How are you showing up for yourself? How are you showing up for others? And how are you showing up for the land?
So what does it mean to even ask for help? Because hyper-individualism, it's a characteristic of white supremacy culture. We're not here for that. It's okay to ask for help. I also like the reframe of what do you want to be to who do you want to be when you grow up? And that's one way that I actually really try to move through the world.
Showing up for yourself means that you can't do everything alone. To know that you have a limited capacity like everyone else. Asking for help isn't a flaw. It's human. And it's a way to connect with other humans, which is so good for your body, and to show that you care about that relationship. What I'm most proud of is embarking on my own to support people in relationships with others and with themselves.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Elaina. I'm really excited to talk about this topic because it is just, I feel like it's going to hit a chord with everybody. So, hello, everyone. My name is Nisha Modi. I am a certified life coach, and I support people who are compassionate to others, but not always so compassionate to themselves. A lot of people who have people pleasing tendencies, who worry about saying the right or wrong thing in certain situations, and that consider themselves as helpers, but they don't always feel like they know how to help themselves. I do coaching in groups and one-on-one settings, and I also provide workshops for organizations, as well as leadership coaching for organizations as well, because I think it's really important for us to have leaders who are looking within and not just looking at how to create a strategic plan, because I think strategic plans can just gather dust if we don't look within and see how we as people are leading ourselves before we lead others.
Thank you. I agree 100%, especially about the strategic plan. We love to do the strategic plan. We love it, but I don't know necessarily if that always gets back to the humanity. And I do appreciate that comment. So today's talk is about people pleasing in the workplace. When I was telling a few people I was doing this talk with Nisha, they were like, why is this a bad thing? I should be at work providing services, and if I have to say yes to things, isn't that part of my job? So, what is exactly people pleasing in the workplace, and why isn't this always the best thing?
Yeah, I love that people said that to you because I think that shows why there's such a need to have discernment. Like I said, I work with a lot of people who consider themselves helpers. And I myself have been in professions where I was a speech language pathologist, I was a librarian. Like these are helping professions. And even before then, I was an IT consultant. So everything I've done has been like in service to understanding people's needs and how to accommodate them, even as a coach myself, right? And there is a fine line between how I'm being supportive to someone in terms of that being my intention versus it being something that comes from a way that I protect myself, a way that I'm doing something that is abandoning my needs in order to serve someone else, which can end up leading to codependent patterns. And what I notice a lot of times is people who come to helping professions, they're always seen as helpers and they have been praised as helpers. And I think what you said just shows that, when people help and then they get approval or rewarded for being a helper, they keep doing that. And oftentimes is at the expense of themselves, at the expense of their energy, at the expense of their time, at the expense of their integrity. And I think that is the fine line that we're talking about. And there's also a lot of power dynamics at play. And I know we'll talk more about this as we continue. But this is where I think it's really important to talk about this because it can end up being that the reason we got into a profession, whatever it might be, isn't really what's happening anymore. We end up feeling extracted from, whether that's just because we are in a subordinate position or because of gender, race, etc. And we can never forget what those power dynamics do in the workplace.
No, no, I think those are really important points. And then also, I know when we were talking earlier, you were saying sometimes if you are saying yes to things that you may not want to say yes to, but you're just saying yes because maybe you're a fear or wanting to be liked or wanting to be accepted, and sort of the physical elements that come about doing, continuously doing and saying yes or for things that are really things that you deep down feel like this is not the right thing to do. Can you talk a little bit more about like how that might manifest within your body?
Absolutely. People pleasing, another name for that from a nervous system perspective is the fawn response. And the fawn response is kind of a hybrid combined response of a constriction of your body that's like saying, no, I don't want to do this. So you kind of feel like a little frozen, but then there's a performance of, yes, I'll do this. And I always give the example of like, if your friend asks you to move and you like really don't have the capacity or desire or whatever it might be, um, to do that, you might inside be like, feel like a tightness in your chest, queasiness in your stomach, something saying, I don't know if I could do this. But then there's a performance where you're like, yeah, sure, I can do this or whatever. So maybe the in between is like, you know what, I can come for an hour. And then that constriction opens. And then that's actually being in integrity and being in your truth. But that's how it shows up in the body is that frozen tightness, that constriction, but then there's a mix of a performance. One thing that I think is important to remember is that this response comes from relational threats. So an example I often give is if you are in your home and someone breaks in and they want to steal your things, you might say, "Oh, it's okay, take everything you can," like just because you don't want to be physically harmed or you don't want your family members or loved ones to be harmed. That doesn't mean you want them to take your things. Of course, you're constricted. Of course, you want to live, but that is where this comes from. But then it gets overgeneralized and overcoupled in other situations where you feel like it's survival because either you won't belong. And I always have this book handy called The Politics of Trauma by Stacey K. Haynes. It's a book that I use in my courses and in my presentations because she talks about how our human needs are safety, dignity, and belonging. And the fawn people pleasing response is oftentimes a way that we belong, a way that we keep our jobs, a way that we have friends. So we might say, like, oh, sure, I love that music when we don't. Because we want to be part of the conversation, right? This is something that can happen so casually. And it happens a lot as we grow up as children. And, of course, that's impacted by things like patriarchy, women keeping themselves small. We're raised as a girl or a woman so that you can belong, so that you can also adhere to patriarchy, to the male gaze.
I think that is important because I think a lot of times you can tell, after a while, you can tell when people are saying yes to things and then later, or it turns more passive aggressive where they're saying yes. And then as soon as the meeting's over, they're like, oh, I hate that or whatever, but they're not really saying anything actually when this is happening, right? And I also always think about these times where people continue to say yes and yes and yes, and then it starts to really affect their health and stress and things like that. And then one day you might ask them something and they blow up. Like, like what, whoa, where did that come from? Like, why you said yes to everything else. So the person on the other end doesn't know that you have a conflict. They might see your nonverbal cues, but if your words are not matching it, they're going to just go with what your words are saying. And then the sort of the blow up, or passive aggressive energy, you say yes, and then you figure out ways to sabotage the program or sabotage whatever they were saying. Sort of a, I don't feel I don't feel like I have the power to say anything, but I have a power of doing something else behind the scenes. Sort of leads to this sort of passive aggressive culture where people are agreeing to things, but really not feeling comfortable with it. And a lot of times when I talk to people about this, they say that they feel powerless. Like the workplace, especially if they're not middle management or they're not in the leadership hierarchical structure, they are powerless. They use the language of powerless. So
Hmm.
therefore I have to acquiesce. And what do you say about to people who are like, well, that sounds great, but I'm just little person on the bottom of this hierarchical totem pole and I'm not, and I have bills to pay, so I don't have the luxury of pushing back.
Absolutely. And I completely understand when someone, if they push back at all and then they are reprimanded or given consequences that can put their job at risk. I understand. And I think we often forget about the agency we have to even pay attention to our bodies. So maybe that's taking a walk in the middle of the day for 10 minutes. Maybe that's just taking some extra breaths. Like even those little things are giving yourself a choice. Because I think oftentimes, like you said, powerless implies that you have no choice, but we often have more choices than we think and that we don't always exercise because the overwhelm is so much. The power is so strong, the power over. And that totally makes sense. And our brains are trained to be attuned to the negative biases so that we can survive. So we have to very intentionally think about, okay, what are my choices in this situation? What can I say no to? Can I say yes to myself to? Maybe it's like, fine, I will do this, but this is as much as I will do today. I will work on it for 30 minutes, an hour, whatever. So, yeah, I do think people are in different contexts and situations where some people, I always say there's situations where we perceive that something is unsafe and then things are, they are actually unsafe. And oftentimes, many of us, especially if you consider yourself a helper, if you're raised in a way where you're praised to help people, where you're always the mediator, you're the responsible person in your family, you're the one doing all the things, even mediating fights between your parents, things like that, you will often fall into that role a lot. And then you will start saying yes to things and taking responsibility for things that you don't have to just because you're used to it and you perceive that things will be unsafe when they might not be. So I think it's really important to discern when something's actually unsafe versus when you might think it's unsafe because you've been conditioned in that way. And are there situations where you could actually lose your job if you say no to something? Absolutely. That is very real and alive. And I think if that's the case, like I said, you could do those micro moments and also find ways to feel resourced outside of the workplace, whether it's with friends, family members, therapy, etc. It is important to get resourced before you go in that environment, especially if you literally cannot financially survive. And I also know people who've been in that position that eventually they just quit anyways because they're so burnt out. Or, like you said, health. People pleasing impacts your health because you burn out so much that you literally cannot physically work anymore. Like I said, I'm not here to say, oh, just quit, it'll be fine. I know it's not an easy situation, especially these days. The landscape for finding jobs is quite difficult. And I also know that sometimes people end up doing it anyways. But I also really want to speak to what I was saying, where we perceive the unsafety. And sometimes it's not that it's actually unsafe, it's just that we're just used to that behavior. And it really takes a lot of intention and looking within to see, like, okay, how much am I taking this on that I don't really have to? And what am I afraid will happen? What does it mean about me? What am I making it mean about me if I say no? As opposed to other people might not care. And I always share things about my personal life. Like I was in an abusive marriage. And, if I said no, or I said, I want this other thing for dinner, like literally that could spark like verbal abuse, emotional abuse. And I remember when I first started dating my partner, who I've been with for over 7 years, and we talked about dinner, I would just get really like tight and I'd be like, well, what do you want? And he was like, I don't know. What do you want? He was just really casual because that wasn't like he was a safe person, right? He wasn't going to emotionally and verbally abuse me if I wanted something for dinner that he didn't want. But I was so trained to tighten up and to like be hyper vigilant, which is, for those who don't know, hypervigilance, like waiting for the other shoe to drop, walking on eggshells. And I'm glad I've done a lot of my own inner work after I got divorced to realize that. I said to him, I'm realizing like I'm really scared to even answer that question. And I'm noticing this because this is what happened in my marriage, and it just really put me on edge. And I know I intellectually know you're not like that, but like my body responds first, and your body will always respond first before your logical brain does. So that's something to keep in mind and to give yourself grace for. That takes a lot of unlearning because it's literally ingrained in your neurons and your nervous system to respond in that way so that you could survive. Because who wants to be yelled at? You know what I mean? Yeah.
I think that's really important. The point that you say that your body usually is responding first, and And for a lot of times, it needs for us to take more time to be in tune with our body. And I remember we were talking before, and I always still think it's advice, especially for people who are much more introverted and need more time for that reflection to take a step back from the situation. You don't always have to, even if somebody's giving you information, you don't always have to respond right away. Oh my gosh, you got to respond right away. I've got to say something, right? And sometimes it's okay to just say, I need some time. And like we were saying before, get a journal, things down. How do you feel? What is going on with you? Get that reflection time and what you might want to do or say. And before you come back and say, hey, I thought about this for a while, and these are some other things that I was thinking about. Don't say yes right away. Tell people I got to think about this for a minute and process it. Because a lot of times, from a perspective of when I used to be in the leadership team or a leader, a lot of times we are under a lot of pressure to get things done, like get it done. Like on the other side of the organization, the leaders are being told, we need for your department, your whoever to get this done, right? And in our minds, we're just trying to get it done, right? And I think a lot of times, when people are like, I'm powerless, I'm like, not necessarily, right? We just need it done. Right? I don't need your journey of getting it done does not need to fall in a very tight schedule. There's
Mhm.
still, when I'm saying I need for you to get this done, there could still be like, I can get this done, but this is what makes sense for me and whatever else I got going on to get this done, or let's negotiate this, or let's talk this through. I think that's still a very legitimate thing, especially if you've already, your organization on paper has said that we are open and, and
Mhm.
transparency and communication and open communication, any language that they're using to go in the spirit of open communication. I would like to talk to you about how can we get this done that still makes sense for the work that I have and a balance of what I need to do. I think that's not saying no, but it's also standing up for yourself um, and like that I loved your example of my friend has asked me to help move and I'm like, I'm really overwhelmed and busy, but I have an hour, right? That is I'm still, I love you, so I'm still willing to help, but this is within the restrictions of what I have, right? So how can you figure out a way to say, well, if you're afraid of saying no, but you're still wanting to, like you said, open yourself up to have that conversation of who you are.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love you bringing up like kind of holding an organization accountable for the values that they espouse, to say that, one of the reasons I love working here is because we have the value of open communication. And I just might want another day or two to, think about this before I answer. Because oftentimes, like personally, I feel very protective of my time. And so sometimes I start feeling like, oh my God, you're taking my time. And then I realize nobody's asking me to that unless like they ask me directly, like, I need to know this right now or whatever, or you need to do this for me for all day. Then I'm kind of like, well, is this a coercive weird situation? That's also a problem. But I feel that way because of how I was brought up, with that sense of urgency, with that sense of I'm going to do something wrong, etc. But I have to take a beat to say, first of all, I don't have to respond to this text message or whatever right away. That's my urgency in my like, I'll be bad if I don't respond, or like I have to explain myself, like, oh, I really want to come, but here's my 15 reasons I can't, when no one's like really asking for that. And most of my friends are like, that's fine. Don't worry about it. You can just say no. But I feel like I have to explain myself to be considered valid. And I think that's also something that happens when, if you want to say no to something, that the over explaining, it can be a trauma response as well. And I really like the idea of saying, like, this is how my agency. I don't have to protect myself in any way. I have this choice. I can say no and say what I need, as opposed to speaking from a place of fear and acting from a place of fear.
Oh, no, I completely agree with that. And so, in general, from all of your work and working with your different clients and stuff like that, when you talk to them about, people pleasing or being more as you are codependent within that organization, what are some of the things that you think organizations are doing that sort of manifests more of that people pleasing behavior?
Sure. I think one, they're not always giving agency or being transparent. And being transparent is like withholding information, and that can make people hyper vigilant. When people are hyper vigilant, they always react from a trauma response because they're afraid of what might happen, especially if they're in a power under position. So that can facilitate all types of responses, include whether it's fight, flight, freeze, fawn, a combination of all of those. So I think not being transparent and not doing anything to cultivate safety and trust in an organization is one way that that can very easily happen. I think as leaders, not working on understanding your own nervous system and how you respond to things and how that might impact the people that you supervise and lead, that is something that is, I think, really huge. And that's kind of where we're talking about the strategic plan. Like there's that phrase, culture eats strategy for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, right? Like it doesn't matter how many strategies you have, if your culture, whether it's in the organization, on a specific team, and within yourself, because of course how you are is impacted from generations of people and places and things. If you're not attending to that, you're not even conscious about where you're leading from. So I think looking within about how you lead, why did you want to be a supervisor in the first place? Why did you want to be a leader, and being really honest with yourself about it, and understanding how your reasoning and how like impacts how you lead. Just, yeah, being really honest with yourself about that. I think it's also really important to take the time to get to know the people in your organization, how they work, how they process, to let them know that I don't expect you to overwork or overcommit. And I will let you know if I notice that, because I care about your well-being. Let them know the options if there's any like employee like services, like occupational, like I know there's occupational health and things like that, like ways that they can access that if they need the support. I think even mentioning if there's any research in the field or patterns in the field that I notice in this field people really overwork themselves and I really want that to change. I think being very open with your team about that gives them permission. And I think a lot of times, unless we're given permission, especially if we're in a power under position, we don't know that we can take it. We don't know that we can take a break. We don't know that we can say no. And I think doing that and also being a role model yourself, saying like, yeah, I'm taking a mental health day as your supervisor. And I encourage you to do that too, or whatever, it might be. So I really think being the change, as cliche as it is, as common of a saying it is, being that role model really provides others with the opportunity and permission to do the same, while also interrogating within, and also understanding what are your values. And one thing I think that's really powerful is doing a values exercise with your team, so you understand what matters to them, because what matters to you and what matters to the organization still might be different to what matters to people individually. And if you know that, then you can say, okay, well, I know this is something that's important to you. Like, was this something you'd prefer to do if there's another like project or activity or whatever it is? Or saying, think about your values and think about how that is informing whatever your decision you're making. Like, give them the opportunity to say, hey, check in with your anchor. Because I always talk about how values are an anchor and a compass. Like, it grounds you, but also shows you what direction you want to go in. And remind them that they have permission to remember what their values are and be in integrity with them.
No, when you were that was excellent. And I was thinking when you said that when I used to be a director, I was very intentional to not highlight my superstars in my all staff meeting, because the competition that happens, right, just naturally without you really even thinking about it. Sort of like Nisha, she did such a wonderful job, and instantly people hate Nisha. And you're sort of unconsciously pushing people to overwork for that kind of validation and acceptance, right? Because people are still unconsciously being watching to see what is successful, right? You can talk all day, but your actions as a leader shows exactly what's going on, right? And so as somebody who was like an overachiever, Elaina overachiever, I know, and I was always the person that like, we love Elaina. Look what Elena's done. I've always been that position. So when I became a leader, I was very, very conscious to not do that to other people. So I did. You still have to reward the overachievers, but I would actually go in their office and talk to them separately, like, hey, blah, 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 blah. But I didn't, like, look, and so that unconsciously I knew it would unconsciously think people like, I need to be more like Nisha, right? I need to be more like her. Even though I'm not telling you, I'm rewarding Nisha. And that means I'm rewarding somebody who's going above and beyond. So that puts pressure on you unconsciously to go above and beyond. And then I also was very, very intentional of just going kudos for people just doing day-to-day jobs. I think a lot of times we don't reward people for just coming in and doing a good job, not above and beyond, not knocking themselves down, not, oh, they won this huge award. But, as I would walk around the building and I would see someone just doing something that would be considered a good job, just a normal thing, I would write them a note of like, hey, I noticed that good luck, you're doing great, we're so happy that you're here. And I would always tear up at sometimes when I would actually go into their offices, and those little notes that I would give them would be all over their office, because you forget as a leader how much power people, in this power dynamics, that people think of that. And people really ultimately, going back to what you just said, want to be seen, and they
Hmm.
want to feel like they're on the right track and they're doing the job. And not everybody can be the superstar. Not everybody can be the shiny light. And if I'm in the back room doing processing, I'm not going to be the person who's out in the front doing sales or whatever they're doing. I'm in the back processing. So how can we, in the sort of balance of the organization, reward people for just coming in and feeling like they're a part of the team and feeling like their voice matters? And so if we as leaders make people feel like their voice matters, I feel like that allows them to tell us a little bit more if we're asking them to do something that doesn't match with their values. I always felt like, me as a leader, my job is to get people to open up to me and to give me the good and the bad news, because I wanted to hear the bad news. I'd rather hear it than you bad mouthing me behind my back, right? So, like, how can I cultivate an environment that you felt
Yeah.
comfortable going, you just gave me an assignment and let's talk about it. I was always open to that, because I'd rather talk it out with you right then and there than you being stressed out about it behind the scenes. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I love thinking about this is someone's role and responsibilities, and that's enough. Because I think we grow up in meritocracy, right? Like we grow up in schools where we're given grades and the superstars are rewarded and the people who don't get the best grades are punished. And oftentimes that might be because of learning differences, that might be for lots of reasons. And that doesn't mean that they're less important, but meritocracy makes some people important and therefore has to make other people less important. And we are raised in that way. So when you're in an organization, you can't undo the past, but you can do things like you're saying to say, what you did is enough and you are enough, even though this person's the quote unquote superstar, like you wouldn't say that, but like that in your head. And you don't have to be that person. You are doing your job and you're doing good. And that makes, yeah, even when you said like people kept your sticky notes, that just like warmed my heart hearing, because I think that everyone just wants to be seen and heard as human beings. And that's really seeing them, that's really hearing what they're saying, and that's really caring about them genuinely. So I think that that's really important to understand, not just to remind people that what they're doing is enough, showing up is enough. Because I always say that the opposite of scarcity isn't abundance, it's actually enough. Because when you're in scarcity, nothing's going to be enough to help you feel abundance. When you are feeling like you're enough, then abundance is available, right? So yeah, I think that that's super important. Also, just to me, it also goes to show that you're understanding what a relational dynamic on a team can look like, that people might be in competition and they might have a competitive edge. Some people, I do think maybe some people just naturally are more competitive, but I also think that that comes from a place of scarcity and fear and feeling like they're not enough and or worrying that they're not going to be enough or seen as enough, by the person who's going to be evaluating them. Right. So I think that that is what you can do to understand, like, okay, this is how I can, unlearn this with myself and with them. Do it. Cause I think the word power gets a really bad rep. And there's a difference between power over and power with. And what you're telling me is having power with them is what cultivates that safety. And that is actually a reframe that I have when I do my trauma informed care workshops, moving from power over to power with. What is the difference? And I was thinking about when you said empowerment, there's a trauma informed principle called empowerment, voice, and choice. Like, what are you doing to empower them? How can they have a voice? What choices can you give? What choices do you give them permission to realize that they have? I think is, really, really conducive and supportive to having an environment where you can cultivate safety. I never say make a safe space, because I think safety is not determined by anyone but ourselves. But I always say, what can we do to cultivate safety? Because there's some things we could do to do that. And there's other things that if we're just, just doing things as usual, not being intentional at all, like we might unintentionally be reproducing and re-traumatizing people without even realizing it.
No, I agree, especially the traumatizing people and having no idea that that's what's really going on. So
Mhm.
just turning to, I know people who are listening are like, well, what's the solution? Like, what should I do? What can I do? What can I do? So what is some advice that you would provide to the audience?
Yeah, great question. So if you notice that you are saying yes when you mean no, or you're performing and feeling like you're wearing a mask in the workplace when you don't really want to, and that's grating at you, I think it's really important to connect to your body. And first and foremost, always give yourself grace to know that this is a way that you've protected yourself in the past so that you can belong, so that you can feel accepted, and not see yourself as a problem. I think that's one of the first things I do when I coach with people is to say that there's nothing to be fixed. This challenge you're having is not a problem. It is a way that your body has protected yourself, and we're going to befriend that part of you. You are not like people pleasing is not your personality. It's not just who you are. It might be very ingrained as a response that you have, and you can intentionally do something to change it. And the way I support people to do that, and people can recognize on their own, is okay. I always talk about like the story in your head that comes up when a situation presents itself where you might be performing. So when someone says, "Oh, hey, can you do this?" or "There's this project," before you say yes, think about what story comes up in your head. Like, is it, "Oh, I better do this because then I'll, maybe I'll get promoted or maybe I'll get approval or whatever it is." Is it that, "Oh, yeah, I'm sure I could squeeze it in my calendar," but realizing like, I always say that. So really understanding what the stories in your head are also like, and these could be old stories like, "Oh, when I said yes before to my mom, she rewarded me in some way. And then when I said no, I was punished. Like, so is there something in your head that's saying, internal dialogue that's saying, I'm going to be punished if I say no, even if that's not actually the case where you work? So noticing the stories and also noticing the physical somatic response you have in your body when that happens. Like, do you feel tightness? Do you feel like your heart beating, something happening? That's again a way that your body is signaling to you because your nervous system doesn't have eyes. It doesn't know how old you are. So it's responding from like an earlier age. So lots of times you're saying yes as a 10-year-old, not as an adult who can cultivate safety in different ways. I always say talk to people about this, connect with others who you can ask who you feel safe with, that you feel you could say like, you know what, I'm noticing I'm doing this. Like, how can you like support? I need this type of support, or can you give me some reassurance that I'll be okay? Like even reassurance from others is really, really helpful. I always share with people like this feelings and needs tool. I do whole workshops on identifying your feelings and needs because I think oftentimes there's an unmet needs drive behavior. I have a teacher who taught me that. And lots of times it's our unmet needs that is leading us to say yes to. So there's so many tools and ways to look at this and to respond differently. But I think awareness is always going to be the first step that, okay, I'm doing this. Like, why is this happening? What story is it coming from? Am I really in a situation where unless I say yes, I'm going to lose my job? Is it really that dire, or is it something that you're just afraid of, or that has happened in a previous position that is making you afraid? Like, just be honest with yourself. And also notice how you feel toward the feelings that come up. If you're feeling anxious, are you annoyed with the anxiety so that you do something to make it go away? Or are you saying, oh gosh, I'm going to be compassionate toward this anxiety so I can tend to it? And then it dissipates in its own way. And I guide people through exercises where they can do that because we always hear like feel your feelings, and I say that too. And I think it's really important for us to not push our feelings down. But if we're just feeling our anxiety and it's just us feeling our anxiety and we don't really know what to do with it, or we're really frustrated with it, that's also not going to be productive in terms of shifting behavior. You have to think, okay, how do I feel toward my feelings? How do I feel toward my fear? Do I think it's a problem? Do I think I suck? Like, that's not coming from a place of compassion or curiosity. I always say in my trauma informed care workshops that being trauma informed with others starts with being trauma informed with yourself. So really noticing that. And last and definitely not least is be really honest about the power dynamics that are at play. Is there a power over, even if you're in a power under position hierarchically, are you a white man? How is that impacting, how others are perceiving you, how you're talking to others? What privileges do you have that someone else might not have, that's not making you realize like the power of what you say, the opportunities that other people have that you might be getting that other people might not be getting? And I know that might not be like as much of a people pleasing thing necessarily, but I do think just understanding your power positions in an organization brings an added awareness that's tied to the nervous system. Because sometimes if you're in a power over position and you people please, it's actually manipulation. And so that's also not good. You know what I mean? You can either appease someone, or you are appeasing someone, or you're manipulating them. And power under could be more appeasement, and power over can be manipulation. And I teach that in my power over, power under ones, like workshops where depending on your power dynamics, if you normally have people pleasing behavior, how it can shift, and how your trauma responses change depending on the power dynamics themselves. So really recognizing what is my power here, that maybe I'm not realizing, whether it's hierarchical, maybe it's positionality, identity, etc., and how is that impacting, you know, how everyone is feeling.
No, no, I think those are really, really good tips and really good points. I can hear someone because I've done enough of these talks to know that someone's going to say, but my boss is a toxic, my boss is a bully, my so and so is, the leadership team is dysfunctional. That sounds great if I had somebody that was reasonable that I could talk to, but that's not the case. And so I was wondering, in your practice, do you help people kind of work through, yes, sometimes we're lucky to get some super great boss, but and a lot of times you get human beings that are somewhat flawed. And so how to work through where the person feels really terrified of the person, whether they're an out and out bully or they're a quiet sort of indirect bully, but it's still bullying behavior.
Yeah, that's a great question, especially if it comes to people pleasing. I talk often about the difference between um, empathy and emotional caretaking. Sometimes, even if we have a bully, well, because we have a bully, we give in a lot because we're afraid of the consequences. But in lots of ways, that's actually taking care of and like managing them and their feelings, as opposed to, okay, I understand this is happening and it's not my job. I don't have to take responsibility for other people's feelings. So I talk about the difference between people who take care about someone's feelings versus caring for someone's feelings. Like, okay, I can understand that this bully like is feeling this way and it's not my job to take care of their feelings. And this is for anybody, whether it's a bully or not. And I think if it's a bully, really going back to when there's a bully, who are previous bullies in your life? How have you responded in those situations? What responses are you having to this bully? And again, I think going back to the feelings and needs, what feelings do you have and what needs are being unmet? And what are some ways you can meet your own needs or ask someone else for some support because you know that this bully is not going to do that? How are you, again, making yourself responsible for managing the situation? Because I think what ends up happening, and there's something that others might be familiar with if you're not, it's called internal family systems, which is like parts work, where there's like the managers. These are the proactive things that you do. You people please, you manage, you figure things out, you're hyper vigilant, you're making sure you're planning, you're doing all these things. Then there's the firefighters, and that's reactive. And you had mentioned early on today, someone who people pleases a lot, then suddenly you ask them to do something and they blow up. That's the firefighter, right? Either you can numb, you can just like totally shut down, you might like have major rage. And the thing is, that firefighter is going to come out in one way or another. So that's why it's really important to understand what's happening within you in terms of your nervous system. Like, I do a whole nervous mapping exercise and workshop where we go through like these are the different nervous system states. This is the physical posture of that state. These are the stories that might come up. This is where it might come from. I talk about what are some things that get you into that, and what are some things that can move you out of that. Maybe it is that 10-minute walk. Maybe it is texting a friend. Maybe it is saying, okay, before I go to this meeting, I'm going to meditate for 10 minutes because I know that my bully is going to be in there. What am I carrying into this meeting from another part of my day? Maybe I had a fight with the spouse, maybe I'm just frustrated about something. I called an airline and they're pissing me off, like there could be so many things you're doing that you're carrying into another situation where the bully's at. So how are you caring for yourself when you know that that person is there and like you can't change the situation? And I know it is extra energy, but I also know that spending that extra time and investing your time in caring for yourself in that way will save you time in the end. It just requires that you front load with those extra care practices. And the more you do it, the more natural they'll be. Like before I had do a coaching session, I always like make sure I have 5 to 10 minutes to just like ground myself, look at the notes beforehand. I always start my coaching sessions with like a moment to settle in. I just guide my clients through like 2 to 3 minutes of just settling in our bodies. And I do that for myself too. I tell them that too. I'm doing this for myself because I also need to show up for you. And that's my responsibility. So how are you actually doing that throughout your day? So I think having those care practices, and in a way, part of it is like managing the situation, especially if it's not one that you feel safe enough to leave. But it is also saying like, I do have choices. I do have power. this is a toxic maybe organization, toxic boss, toxic person that they're not going to change. They're always going to be like this. Yes. And what can you do? I think one thing about having my own business that I've realized is I can't really blame a boss. Like I can blame like capitalism and, all these things, but I am my boss and I have to think about how I'm being extractive of myself, what choices I have. And it's made me realize that even in those situations when I was at work, it's really easy. And I'm not saying that there's bosses that aren't harmful, that there's people on harmful organizations. I'm not saying that, but I think it's really easy to just point the finger and say, I don't need to do anything when you might have actually more agency. And I actually think remembering you have agency is a way to empower yourself instead of making yourself disempowered because of how you're being treated. And that's a good practice that you could bring into any situation because the fact is, you might have like a problematic family member, that you're going to be seeing this holiday season. You might have like things. So I think that's really important. And actually, I have a workshop coming up about boundaries. And I think understanding, and I make values based boundaries. So, really creating boundaries for yourself that don't just have to be what you say to somebody else, but how are you protecting your time? How are you thinking about your emotional boundaries, physical boundaries, all these different boundaries that you can have when you go into any situation. Maybe your boundary is, this person is toxic. So my boundary is like, because I care about my mental health right now, I am not going to respond when they say something in this way. That is a boundary. It doesn't even have to be something you tell them. It could just be something internal that you've decided. And they're based on values because I always make boundaries that are not about someone else changing their behavior. They're about what I'm doing. Because if I'm going to wait for someone else to change their behavior, it's just like, that's not, then you're still going to be hyper vigilant, right? But when it comes from a value centered place, it's something that matters to you and it's more intrinsically motivating. So yeah, I'm really excited about that. And I'll drop a discount code. I'll give you a discount code you put in the comments. If anyone wants to come to my masterclass on December 6th, it's going to be really like I don't want to say jam packed in terms of too much information, but kind of everything you need, the information, coaching time with me and practice so that when you walk into those situations, you feel more confident. You don't feel guilty. It feels more natural, not like the first time you're doing it.
Wonderful. I definitely will put that information down before we let you go, just in case somebody wants to see your lovely face again. What are some other things that you talk about and you coach about that you would let people know, just in case they're like, Elaina, bring her back and she needs to talk about what?
Yeah, sure. So, in terms of workshops, I've been doing lately, the hot workshops have been identifying your feelings and needs, power over versus power with, and trauma informed communication strategies. And honestly, that all kind of goes together. Those are like recent workshops I've been giving. I also share like more of my story about how I had 6 careers by the time I was 40, talking about my abusive relationship and how I thrived afterwards. And I'm also writing a memoir about my divorce right now. And you can always coach with me one on one. Some things that, like, I right now am coaching with someone who has a lot of workplace bullying issues for years. And it has really like made her not want to go into work. And she really wants to get more empowered. And we're working on that. And that's been like truly amazing to see her growth, even after like a couple months. There's just been so much more growth in awareness and confidence. I also work with people who want to start something new, but keep self-sabotaging or keep like people pleasing and having these trauma responses that are stopping them from, or they're making them continue to shrink themselves instead of being like in their bigness and moving into the next chapter of their life that could be in integrity and very liberating. So I also work with people towards specific goals if they want to start something, like start writing or start a specific project or even do something in the workplace. Something to guide them. I have a client who says that I'm like a guide, like a hiking guide. Like I'm a person that's like, okay, here's where you go, and I love that because I love like allowing people to like giving them permission to say like, okay, this is kind of where I need to go. And like, I'm going to give you a direction and I'm not going to push you because you're the one that's walking. So that's my style. It's very like grounded, warm, trauma informed and empowering because I don't want to have clients forever. I want you to have the skills to be able to do things on your own or say, okay, you know what? I'm done working with you now. I want to focus on this other thing. I want that to happen because obviously I'm not trying to create a codependency with myself either. That would be out of integrity for me. And so, yeah, those are just a few of the things I've worked on with folks, especially those who notice that they give a lot and overgive and are overly generous with others, but not generous with themselves. So if you have those challenges and you're trying to work toward shifting them, I am your girl.
No, I think that's great. I really applaud you for really, leaving the 9 to 5 to do this humanistic work. And I think in these really turbulent times that are going on, that this this type of work is really, really needed. So I want to thank you for actually taking your own risk and going with what's feeling good in your heart in terms of your coaching and training and life coaching practices. I also think what would be interesting, and my thing is what gave you the courage to leave your 9 to 5 job, and how are you navigating through being your own entrepreneur? I think a lot of people would be interested in that journey as well. So if you are, put the comments down below. Other than that, I want to thank Nisha again for her wonderful insights. I will put all of her information into the information fields. Feel free to reach out to her if you want additional information. I will also put the discount code for her upcoming boundaries information workshop. And so that's enjoy your wonderful holiday. Thank you, Nisha, so much. And we will see you soon.
Thanks, Elena. Thanks everyone for watching.
Thank you.